We're on Daf Lamed Omid Beis, and we're up to the last line on the Amud. Amalei Abayler of Yosef. Bilazu. Now we're about to enter into an entire series of questions that Abaye presents to Rav Yosef. Abaye was probably the greatest disciple of Rav Yosef, Talmud of Rav Yosef. Now let's introduce the first question. Rabbi Yehuda, if you remember, was of the opinion that before you enter into the Azara, no matter who you are, you have to be Tovel. Even though you're Becheskas Tara, we have no reason to suspect that you're Tomei. And this was a Takonas Chachamim, according to Rabbi Yehuda, to remind you, to jolt your memory, and investigate, if you can, where you've been in the last couple of days, and would you have possibly contracted Tumah before you entered the Azara, which is a violation of a very severe Avera, if you were Tameh. So we shake you up, so to speak, with a reminder, and that's called Tefillah. So we're not talking about Ben Zoma. He has Tefillah D'Oraisa based on a Kal V'chomer as a requirement for someone who's entering into the Azor. So, for example, a Kohen who goes into the Azor to start his daily avoda with daybreak, he needs a Tefillah D'Oraisa with all the restrictions and conditions that apply to Tefillah. But when we get to Rabbi Yehuda and we're talking about a rabbinic institution enacting a Tefillah because of jolting your memory as a Zikaron, Abai wants to know, do the same highfalutin requirements apply to this Tefillah? Do we have room to offer a validity to what I'd call a Maisa Tefillah, which is externally a Tefillah? It looks like a Tefillah, but it wouldn't have a Chal Shem Tefillah if we were to compare it to the standards of Tefillah D'Oraisa. He says, and again, here I would read the brackets. Normally we don't read the brackets. Here I think the brackets should be read. Ula Rabbi Yehuda, the Omar Serech Tefillah Hizo, which means that according to Rabbi Yehuda, this was an enactment of the Chachamim to require Tefillah. And now we turn to Daf Lamed Aleph, Chotzeitz o Eino Chotzeitz. What happens if he has something that's attached to his body? It's Davuk Legufo, and it separates his body from the mikvah. Now, this is a Maisa Tvila. I mean, his body certainly was immersed in a mikvah, but we have a psul, a disqualification that undermines the impact of this Maisa Tvila, the ultimate goal of the Maisa Tvila. Cannot be mitayar him because of this chatzitza. And Abai wants to know, maybe when the Rabbanon instituted a requirement of Tvila, they danced to their own tune and they set their own rules, and their regulations require a Maisa Tvila, which means that the body is submerged in the mikvah, even if, we would look with a a telescope, not a telescope. If we look with snorkels, we would see that underwater, he has a part of his body that because of a chatzitza, that separates his body from the water. Omalei, meaning Rabbi Yosef said to Abai in response, called the Tikkun Rabbanan ke'ein D'Oraisa Tikkun. This is a universal principle that applies all over Shas, and it means that when the Rabbanan institute an enterprise that is a duplicate of what the Torah had in mind, then the Rabbanan require all the requirements and apply it, graft onto the Rabbanan all the D'Oraisa requirements, called the Tikkun Rabbanan ke'ein D'Oraisa Tikkun. So, for example, in Truma, we have Truma D'Rabbanan, and all the requirements of Truma D'Rabbanan are mirror images identical with those requirements that apply to Truma D'Oraisa. So that let's say our hafrosh is true of Bisman Hazeh is the Rabbanon, we need Minamukaf, which means that you have to be mafresh Minei from two things that are on the table. The exceptions to this rule are all over the place. And that's what leads us to deep lumdus, to really understand. For example, Chalas Chutzlaretz is a new entity that doesn't dance to the same tune as Chala Doraisa in Eretz Yisrael. Chalas Chutzlaretz ain't a tovelas. There's no din of tevel. It's radically different than Chala. And we don't apply the principle of Kain Doraisa. Why not? As I say, the fascinating thing about this principle are the exceptions to the rule. And probably Abaye understood in his Havamina, when he was vacillating, that maybe this is an exception to the rule. And Rav Yosef said, no. Full-fledged Tvila, with all the requirements of Tvila, and a Chatzitza apostles the Tvila. Next question. Amalei Abaye, Rav Yosef, Bia b'mikzah shmei bia, o lo. Now, there's a possibility here, a very strong possibility of misinterpreting Abaye and taking the words of Abaye literally as they apply all over Shas, meaning the terminology of Bia b'mikzas is borrowed from and appears over and over again throughout Shas. That's not what Abaye has in mind. Let me explain. In Shas, for example, Zvachim Daf Lamed Beis, there's a machlokes in the Gemara about Bia b'miktas, and that's a case of a tameh. So you have a tameh, and he puts his hands into the migdash. So part of his body entered into the migdash. And the question is he chayiv kares for bias migdash b'tumah? Ula, in the name of Reish Lakish, says that bia b'mikdash shmei bia, and he's chayiv kares like a tameh who goes into the migdash, even though all told were his hands went into the migdash. Ravina has a different transmission of Reish Lakish, and he holds that he's not chayiv kares in the case of bia b'miktas. He violates a lesser violation, but kares is not chayiv, because bia b'miktas lav shmei bia. Then the Gemara in Tvachim quotes a third tradition, and that's Ravin, but not in the name of Reish Lakish, the name of Rabbi Avo, that Nogea b'kodesh, avol bia b'miktas ema bia. All right, so that's another sugya called bia b'kodesh. In any event, that sugya is all on a doraisa level, and the debate and the issue at stake is a chiyuv karetz, with, in a case of a shogeg, a chiyuv karban, chatos. That's not what Abaye is talking about. Abaye wants to know, with regard to Rabbi Yehuda's rabbinic institution of a requirement of tvila, even though he's tar, but the rabbis want this tvila, is what's the halacha if part of his body went into the azar, but not his whole body? In such a case, did the Rabbanon establish that he has to have a tvila? Meaning, what Abaye is vacillating about is the nature of the mechayev of tvila according to Rabbi Yehuda in a tar. Was that mechayev because he's fully entering into the azara, or even if he's partially entering into the azara? And this would not depend on the two opinions about Reish Lakish in the sugya in Zvachim, because there we're dealing with the question of Chiyuv Karis Doraisa, the Miktas Gufo Nichnas Lemigdash in Tameh. Here, no matter what you hold, the same question is going to be, even if I hold that bia b'mixas lav shmei bia, and you're not chayiv kares, but maybe when the Rabbanan instituted a requirement of tefillah, they did so for anyone who enters into the mikdash, into the azara, even if only mixas gufa, which would not be enough to mechayiv him kares, but it still is a violation of an isa doraisa, although we alleviate him of a chiyuv kares. So again, just to formulate Abai's second question, under what conditions did Rabbi Yehuda insist that the Rabbanan enacted an obligation of tefillah? Is it because he's entering totally into the Azara, or even if part of his body is entering into the Azara? And Rabbosai, the answer to Abai's question, I don't even have to read the Gemara, is crystal clear. Because Rabbi Yehuda was quoted as saying that a Mitzorah on his 8th day needs tefillah, despite the fact that he was tovel on the 7th day. And we're going to apply the rabbinic shita of Rabbi Yehuda and be mechayev the Mitzorah a second tefillah, just 12 hours after the first tefillah. Obviously, he has a cheskes tara. We have no reason to suspect that he's tamei, but the Rabbanan required tefillah. That's Rabbi Yehuda's shita. Why is he chayiv tefillah? He's not entering into the mikdash. The answer is his thumbs are entering into the mikdash. He needs matan boen yadav v'raglav in the azara, and that itself, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is mechayev him in this tefillah d'Rabbanan on Yom HaShmini. Amalei, so Rabbi Yosef answered Abaye, bahonos yochichu. After all, Rabbi Yehuda requires a second tefillah for the Mitzorah on his 8th day, in addition to the tefillah on the 7th day. And why? Why is he obligated to this tefillah? He's not entering into the Azara. He's putting his bahonos, his big thumb and his big toe, into the Migdash, into the Azara. Kishemevi ha-Mitzoras karbanos of machnis Yadav liazara b'shvil sheyaze aleim hakoim midam ha'asham umilug hashemen v'shar gufo nishar b'chutz. V'tanya, the Brisa says, Mitzorah tovel v'omed b'shar nikanor. He needs tefillah, even though where is he standing? In the Shar Nikanor, outside the Azara, but he's going to put his fingers into the Azara, and that's enough to be mechayev tefillah. Ibayahu, the next question. Mao sheyase sakin aruka v'yishchot. Now, this question is going to be raised according to both Ben Zoma and Rabbi Yehuda. He's standing outside the Azara, and he has a cheskes tar. But he wants to do the avoda of shchita in the Azara. And he wasn't tovel. So he says, you know what? I don't need tefillah. I'm not going to enter into the Azara. I'm going to take a long knife, and somebody's going to bring over the animal to the Sharon Nikanor. I'll meet at Sharon Nikanor at 2:00 in the afternoon. Bring me an animal, and I'm going to shecht it outside the Azara. The knife will enter into the Azara, because the shechit has to happen in the Azara, but my body will be stationary outside the Azara. Is that okay? Are we afraid that, we're getting a little too close over here? He's leaning with his arm in an outstretched position to shech the animal. You know what I'm saying, Rabbi Osai? He may go a little bit too far, and his body might enter into the Azara. Tiboyle ben Zoma, Tiboyle Rabbanan de Pligia later of Yehuda. We have to raise this suffix, both according to Ben Zoma right? He holds that this chiyuv tefillah is da'oraisa, derived from the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim with a kal vachomer. And we're going to ask this question according to the Rabbanan who argue against Rabbi Yehuda. And they, back on Daf Lamed, were cholek on Rabbi Yehuda. This is based on Ravina that we learned at Daf Lamed and Beis. And they say that only a Mitzorah needs a second tefillah before he enters into the Kodesh, because he was murgal b'tumah, right? He was in a mentality of tumah. But no one else needs tefillah. If they have a cheskes tara, they can enter into the azara. They don't need tefillah. Tiboyle ben zoma ad kan lo mechayev ben zoma el legavoy. Gavoy means on the inside. Ben Zoma says Yechayev Tefillah because you're entering into the Azara. He's not entering into the Azara. He's holding a long knife. Aval Lebroi lo. Odilma, Lebroi means if he's standing on the outside. Odilma, Osi Lim Shuche. Maybe Ben Zoma is afraid that he's Nimshach. Achar Korban. He's stretching his arm out to make sure that he shechts the animal in the proper place. And therefore, he should be chayiv in tefillah. Now, I would add my own note over here that it makes sense, according to Ben Zoma, that since the Torah itself required this tefillah, therefore we have to be super careful. And we have to make sure that under all circumstances, whenever he might be chayiv in tefillah, he should do the tefillah. And since there's a possibility of dilma, what's the language of the Gemara? Asilim shuche, we have to be very demanding and require that he has a tefillah. Because the whole institution that the Torah created here is to guarantee that he does this tefillah. Tiboil Rabbanan de pligi aleid Rabbi Yehuda ad kan lo kamri Rabbanan hasam de lo ka'avid avoda. When did the Rabbanan say that if I enter into the Mikdash, I don't need tefillah because I have a cheskes tara? That's for someone who's not doing the avoda. But we said that everybody agrees that if the Kohen is entering into the Azor to do the avoda, then he's chayiv in tefillah. Hacha de ka'avid avoda. Lo, he's not going to be potur from a chiyuv tefillah because he's doing an avoda. The pella here, but this requires a great deal of study, is that we've had many sugyas in which the Gemara says shchita lav avodi, but we know that shchita is one of the four avodos, so that's an outstanding issue. Odilma lo shna, or should we said it doesn't make any difference? He's part of tefillah because he's not coming in to the azara, and if he's not going into the azara, then lo shna. And in this case, even though he's carrying with him a shchita knife, which is going to implement the shchita as an avoda, it doesn't matter. It's not totally in the avoda. The machayev of tefillah is not the avoda, but rather the knisa lemigdash. And since he's not entering into the migdash because he's standing in the sharnikra with his chalif, with his shchita knife, therefore he's potter. And the Gemara says, Teiku. I'm not sure what the answer to this question is. What is the machayev of tefillah? Is it the avoda per se? Or is it the fact that he is entering into the azor? Avoda we have, but he's not entering into the azor. And this leads us, Rabbosai, to relearn the Mishnah. And the Gemara is going to bring a brisa to explain the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Chamesh Tvilos V'asar Kiddushim Tovel, that 5 times during the course of Yom Kippur, starting with daybreak, the Kohen Gadol needs Tvilah. And we'll see in a minute whether all 5 cases, all 5 occurrences of Tvilah are identical. Actually, we're going to divide it up 1 and 4. And 10 times during the course of the day, he needs what's called Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim from the Kiyar, because every time he changes his begadim, he needs one Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim before he changes his begadim, and another Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim after he has already donned the new set of begadim. 5 times during the day he changes his begadim, hence he needs 10 Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim min HaKiyar. Tana Rabbana, we learned in a brisa, Chamesh Tfilos V'Asara Kiddushim Tovel Kohen Gadol Mekadosh Bo Bayom. He sanctifies himself 5 times in the mikvah during the course of the day of Yom Kippur and 10 times in the Kiyar. The Kulam, the Kodesh, the Beis HaParva. Where is the mikvah into which the Kohen Gadol will immerse himself 5 times? In truth, it's 4 times, because we're going to say chutz mitvila rishona. Okay, so the 4 tvilos, other than the first one, require Beis HaParva. The Beis HaParva was located in the Azara, Kodesh. Now, where exactly was this mikveh? It's very interesting. The Beis HaParva was a chamber that had a roof, and on top of the roof, they built a mikveh. And the Beis HaParva, as I said before, was located in the Azara. Does that mean that the tefillah has to be implemented in a mikveh that has the status of Azara? And that depends upon a sugya that we mentioned at least once in the past. What's the status of the gagos vialios, meaning the rooftops of those chambers that are located in the mikdash? Does the kedushas Azara extend and include even the rooftop? So let's assume, which seems to be the maskot of the Gemara Liel, that gagos lo niskadoshu, lo niskadshu, the sanctification of the Azara did not include the gagos. So the Kohen Gadol, in effect, when he goes into the mikvah on top of the gag of the Beis HaParva, he is not in the Azara. So what's the language of Kulan Bakodesh, the Beis HaParva? Why is it a Makom Kadosh if it's on top of the gag? But in any event, we have to understand that the Kohen Gadol was located in the Lishkas HaFarhedrin. Outside the Lishkas HaFarhedrin was a location that we once mentioned called the Shar HaMayim. You may remember in one of our introductory classes to Kodshim, we spoke about something called Shar HaMayim. And the Shar HaMayim was an area where the Mayon, which had running water that came through the Azara, would end up in the Shar HaMayim. And the Tefillah Rishona, which takes place before the Kohen has even begun his avodah in the morning. So he changed his big day chol, and he donned his big day kodesh, in this case big day lavan. That's the first time that he needs tefillah. Is tefillah rishona haisa b'chol, not b'kodesh but b'chol, al gabe shar hamayim. Okay. Ubitzel lishkasa. Right, it was right outside the chamber that was singled out and dedicated to the Kohen Gadol. So that's where it was located. And the reason why we're going to allow 1 out of the 5 tefillos bechol, whereas all the 4 balanced tefillos require kodesh, is because that first tefillah has nothing to do with Yom Kippur. Any day of the year before the Kohen, and any Kohen, begins his avoda, he needs tefillah. So it's not a tefillah that's generated by Yom Kippur in any unique way. It happens to be Yom Kippur, but it's not a tefillah of Yom Kippur. And all tefillahs have to fit into one or two categories. If they're tefillahs because of Yom Kippur, then the tefillahs have to be b'kodesh. And that means the Beis HaParva. But tefillos that have nothing to do with Yom Kippur per se, but are generated by the avoda of any day of the year, they don't require kodesh, Beis Parva. And therefore, that very first tefillah, which is a chiyuv that would apply any day of the year, whenever the Kohen, any Kohen who starts his avoda, that takes place in the Sharamayim, which is Bechol, because it's not a tefillah of Yom Kippur. You know, it fascinates me. I've done a lot of work in the past on what I call the methodology of brisk. And I gave many, many lectures on this topic. I published and so forth. Sometimes I get very excited when I see a Gemara that is mamish a brisker Gemara. You didn't have to wait for Reb Chaim and his system of categorization and classification in order to appreciate the methodologies right here in the Talmud. Because the Mishnah and the Brisa that embellishes the Mishnah is differentiating between two machayvim of tefillah. This is a built-in classification structure. There's a class of tefillos that are generated by avodas Yom Kippurim, and there's another class of tefillos that are generated by the avoda, no matter when this avoda is performed. And the nafkamina is whether or not we have these strict requirements of a tefillah b'makom kado to the Beis HaParva. If the tefillah is generated by avodas Yom Kippurim, the answer is yes, we require tefillah b'kodesh. If the tefillah is generated by the whole year round, then the whole year round we don't need tefillah in the Beis HaParva. The tefillah took place in the Sharamayim. Omar Abaye, Shmamina, from this brisa, we want to derive a conclusion about that body of water that feeds into the Sharamayim, which is called the Ein Etam. In Hebrew, he writes, Hamayon shemimenu hayamayim agim derech amas hamayim. There were tunnels that brought this water to a makom tvila. Maybe you'd call it gutters. Maybe is a better word. I don't know. And these waters would flow above the Sharamayim, coming from the Ein Etam. So we have to ask the archaeologists to help us here. So above the Sharamayim, we have the Ein Etam, which is feeding water into the Sharamayim. And now Abai wants to know, the Kohen Gadol has to be Tovel in the Sharamayim. How high is the Sharamayim from the Karka of the Azorah? I'm going to prove to you, says Abaye, that Gavoa Mikarka Azorah Esrin V'Sholosh Am. We need a minimum of a height of 23 amos above the Ritzvas HaZorah in order to facilitate a mikvah for the Kohen Gadol. Disnan kol hapsochim shayu sham govam esrim ama v'rachvam eser amos chutz mishal ula. So all of the entranceways, whether it's to the Chel, or to the Ezras Noshim, or to the Ezras Anoshim, or to the Ezras Kohanim, all of the entranceways were 20 amos high and 10 amos wide, with the exception of the chel. I'm sorry, with the exception of the ulam. The ulam was a small, narrow area. It was very long, and it was the, so to speak, the is there a word foyer in English? I'm probably getting the wrong word. Anyway, it was the entrance area into the Heichal, and it had a very tall shar. You'll see it in all the pictures of the Migdash. Do I have any here in this volume? Volume 2. Anyway, you've seen it, right? The shar of the Heichal, which I believe was 50 amma, if I'm not mistaken. But all the other sharim were 20 amas high. Visanya, and we have a brisa. V'rochatz b'mayim es kol b'sara. Every word in this pasuk is going to be interpreted. It says b'mayim, and that b'mayim indicates that it's special water. It's not just any water that you collect in a vessel, but rather may mikvah. May mikvah is the water that comes down from Shamayim. It's not mayim she'uvim. And then it says in the pasuk kol b'sara, which teaches us that he has to be tovel all of his body inside the water, immerse his entire body. And that means that the volume of water in the mikvah has to accommodate his entire body. This is what's called arboim saw, meaning the minimum volume that makes up, comprises a kosher mikvah is 40 saw, which is, Chazal say, is the amount of water for the average person to immerse his entire body from head to toe. The kamahen. So how much is our boim saw if we want to construct a mikvah and we want to guarantee that its airspace will hold and contain a volume of our boim saw? Amma al amma, berum shalosh amos. So you've got 1 amma by 1 amma on the ground, and it shoots up 3 amos high. Again, it's hard for me to imagine how the body could immerse itself in 1 amma. I mean, I don't have broad shoulders, but I guess your average person from one shoulder to the other has up to, but not beyond an amma. You'll check this out with Mr. Google. Anyway, the kamahen. So if you have the requirements and the measurements of a mikvah, you've got 1 amma by 1 amma with a height of 3 amos. Amma al amma berum shalosh amos. Ishiru chachamim me mikvar boim sa. The Rabbanan said with those measurements, and again, we could work on this and figure out how you get to it, you will have a mikvah of 40 sa, which is the minimum volume of a mikvah. Now, if we're saying that all the sha'arim in the Migdash were 20 amma high, that means the Shar HaMayim was 20 amma high. And on top of the 20 amos, they had to build a mikvah. A mikvah has to have a minimum height of 3 amos to accommodate a body, the average body of a human being. So therefore, the mikvah on top of the Shar HaMayim would have to be 23 amos above the ground of the Azara. And therefore the Ein Itam, where the Mayim was coming from, is being fed from this Mayan called Ein Itam, would have to be at a height minimum of 23 amos. So when the waters are coming from the Mayan Itam, it would have to come at a height of 23 amos in order to feed a mikvah on top of the Shar HaMayim, because the Shar HaMayim was 20 amos high, and the mikvah had to be an additional 3 amos of height, all told 23 amos. So the Gemara asks the following question. I'm going to try to finish this up real quickly so we can start a new Mishnah, Mirza Shem, on Yom Rishon. Va'ika ama tikra v'ama maziva. When you build a mikvah, you need an ama's worth of ceiling, of tikra, which has to have a thickness of an amma in order to survive the elements, meaning it has to be strong and durable. And you need an additional amma of a ma'aziva. Okay, then? So you've got now a tikra of an amma and a maziva of an amma, both of which structures have to be added to the mikvah. So if there's an amma of the thickness of the tikra, which is on top of the sharamayim, and an amma the maziva on the bottom of the mikvah, which is called tit v'chol megubolim yachad, ve'im tochim es hatikra lamala, shvil sheyamayim omdim sham. So therefore, Abai should have added to the calculation another 2 amos, and instead of calling it 23 amos, he should have called it 25 amos. And the Gemara answers that Sha'arim the Beis Hamikdash came into Sheisha Ninu. All the gateways of the Beis Hamikdash were made of marble. The mashu avdile, marble is a very durable substance, and it's only a mashu. You don't need a full amos worth to guarantee that it won't destroy. So Gemara asks va'ika hech mashu, but you need at least a mashu. Why did Abai stop at 23 amos? He should have said 23 and 2 mashus. And he says, came into lohavi amso lo choshivle. Abai was only interested in calculating amos. Parsu sadin shel butz, when a Kohen Gadol, the Mishnah says, was entering into the mikvah, they would cover him with a linen curtain. Maishna shel butz. Why did it have to be made of linen? The Omer of Kahana, butz. It was a memory device to remind the Kohen Gadol that today, Big Day Butz, the whole year round, he wore Big Day Zav. But on this day, the avodos that are critical to Yom Kippurim, he's got to wear linen garments, which is called Big Day Lavan. It's hachinami sheyakir avodos hayom the Big Day Butz. That instead of wearing his Shmona Begadim a Big Day Zav, we have to remind him that today is Yom Kippur, and his avodos, which are unique to this day, have to be implemented while he's wearing Big Day Lavan. And that's why in the first Tvila, even though that's going to be followed by regular avodos, like, for example, the Talmud, but nevertheless, they would already, because every time he went to the mikveh, he's trying to use Begadim, so every time he went to the mikveh, even the first Tvila, they would require covering him, so to speak, meaning hiding him behind a curtain that was made of lavan, of pishta. That leads us to the Mishnah here on Daf Lamed Aleph on the days which Mirza Hashem, B'li Neder, will cover on Yom Rishon. Take this opportunity to wish everyone a great Shabbos. Parshas Vayakil and Pekudei and Achodesh Hazel Lachem is an extra kriya with a special honor for the Rosh Chodesh Nisan that will take place, I believe, on Yom Rishon.